Hi guys, Sean here from digiDirect. Today we're going to be taking a look back at the Nikon D750, and I say look back because while the D750 is still a current camera in Nikon's lineup, it's certainly not a new one. It's been out for about 3 years now. Now the reason I want to take a look at this now is because of the success of the D850. That's a camera that Nikon came out with about 6 months ago. I reviewed it, I'll link it up in the corner there. I found it to be exceptional. Many other people did as well. My one caveat with the D850 though is that it's at about a $5,000 price point, at least in Australian dollars, meaning that it's kind of exclusive for the working professional or people who have a fair amount of money to spend on a camera. The D750 still has a lot of very respectable specs and performance, but it's about half the price of the D850, so it's a lot more applicable to hobbyists, people who are getting their first full-frame camera, people who just maybe want a Nikon full-frame camera but they don't need all the bells and whistles of the D850, and so on. So that's why I wanted to take a look at this today. I will be making some comparisons to the D850 as we go along. We'll start though with a look at the body of the D750. So Nikon is generally pretty consistent in their body design, and the D750 is no exception here. This is a very classic looking Nikon body. But don't fix what's not broken, and the D750's construction is very solid, it's dependable, and it's quite functional. When it came out, Nikon advertised that it was one of the smallest full-frame DSLRs. Now it's still certainly larger than something like the mirrorless Sony A7 range, but it is fairly mid-sized for a full-frame DSLR, and it's not too big. It has a very comfortable grip as well as an array of buttons, dials, and a top LCD screen, so there's lots of controls on here. It's also a fully weather-sealed camera, meaning you can take this out into harsh conditions, rain, and so on, and not have to worry about it. Notably, it has a tilting LCD screen, which is a very nice feature. Even these days, it's fairly rare to find a full-frame DSLR with a tilting screen. It's become more common these days, but it's still not commonplace. It also has dual SD card slots, which is really an important requirement for any camera that can be used in a professional setting, so that's great. And it also has both microphone and a headphone jack. So we've got pretty much all of the physical necessities covered here. It also has an accessory port, USB 2 and HDMI, and Wi-Fi connectivity. One of the main differences between the D750 and the D850 or even the D810 is the sensor resolution. So on the D850 it has a monstrous 45 megapixel sensor, which is helpful if you want to get the absolute maximum detail out of your photos. On the D750 it's a bit more modest. It's a 24 megapixel sensor. That's still though right in the sweet spot of where most camera sensor resolution is these days, outside of those very high resolution cameras like the D850. So you're still going to get plenty out of the D750, plenty of room to crop in, do prints and so on. And frankly, if you don't need the very high resolution from like the D850, and realistically most people don't need that, the benefit is going to be that the file sizes are not going to be so big. And something like the D850, that high sensor resolution means very large file sizes. That's not going to be a concern on the D750, so it kind of strikes a nice medium balance there. Image quality is something that's never really been an issue for Nikon. They've always had very, very good image quality, and that carries on to the D750. The image quality coming out of this camera is excellent. I don't think anyone could have any reason to complain about the image quality. It's really, really top notch. Nikon also put a particular emphasis on low-light photography in the D750 here. So it actually has better low-light performance than the D810, meaning that you can shoot at high ISOs fairly confidently, ISO 6400 and so on, without having an excessive amount of grain. That's great for people who are often shooting in darker environments, and one of the reasons why the D750 is so popular as a wedding photographer camera, because wedding photographers are often in dark reception halls or churches. It's also great for nighttime photography, so that's a really nice little perk on the D750. The D750 has Nikon's excellent 51-point autofocus system inside of it. Now that's not quite as robust as the newer 153-point system from the D5 or D850, but at the time of the D750's release, it was their top-of-the-line system, and it's still certainly no slouch. It performs admirably in pretty much all areas of autofocus. It just does a very good job overall. It's also effective at up to a -3 EV, so you can use it in lower light conditions and it's still going to be able to function. That ties in really well with the D750's high ISO performance that we were just talking about. It also can shoot burst shots, series of burst shots at up to 6.5 frames per second, which is decently fast. That's going to allow you to deal with some sports and action type shots if you need some fast movement shots. The buffer is not huge, so it's definitely not a sports-oriented camera from that perspective. It's a 30-shot RAW buffer or about 80 shots for JPEGs. That still represents about 4.5 seconds of continuous RAW shooting when you're shooting at 6.5 frames per second. So that's still enough to get you by in most situations. So Nikon's not generally super well known for their video capabilities, but they did make an effort to address this in the D750. So the camera doesn't shoot 4K, but it can shoot 1080p video at up to 60 frames per second. So you can shoot slow motion in full HD, which is nice. There's a couple other nice features on here. It does have zebra stripes, so if you're looking at the back screen, it can display where you've got overexposed areas. It also has Nikon's flat picture control, which is their flat picture profile. So it's going to have a bit less contrast and saturation, better for color grading. It's certainly not quite as extreme as the log picture profiles that we've been seeing in video-centric cameras more recently, but it is a step in the right direction for someone who wants to be color grading their footage. As mentioned earlier, it does have both a mic and headphone jack, so you can mount external mics and monitor that audio on here, no problem. And the tilting LCD screen that we looked at earlier also is very useful for video footage because it allows you to shoot at different angles and so on, so that's nice. Also, it has time-lapse functionality, so you can shoot a time-lapse in camera, it'll put it all together for you and build it all in camera, which is a nice feature. So while it may not be the craziest spec video shooter on the market, especially considering it's a couple years old now, it still does a respectable job. It's definitely still primarily a photocentric camera, but for the photographer who needs to be shooting video occasionally, this is still definitely an effective solution. So overall, the D750 may not be quite as sexy as the D850, and if you are looking for the absolute best autofocus performance or the absolute maximum megapixel count, you should still be looking at the D850. But for a lot of people, I think the D750 is still an extremely solid performer, and I think it does so at a much more reasonable price point. Again, about half the price of the D850, still quite a lot cheaper than even the D810. So I think it represents a very good value for the photographer who doesn't necessarily need everything the D850 has. So for that reason, that's why I thought it was useful to review again at this point in time. I hope that you found that useful. If you wanted to test out the D750, you can come to one of our stores and do so. We've got stores in the Sydney CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, Chatswood, the Brisbane and Melbourne CBD, and Cannington, Western Australia. You can also order the D750 on our website at www.digidirect.com.au. Thanks guys, take care.